In today's rapidly evolving industrial landscape, where sustainability, digitalization, and operational resilience are no longer optional but essential, the role of process industries has never been more critical. At the heart of this transformation is ABB, a global technology leader driving innovation across mining, metals, cement, and other energy-intensive sectors. Joining us today is Joachim Braun, Division President, Process Industries at ABB. With a strong background in industrial automation and a global perspective that's shaped by decades of leadership, Joachim brings valuable insights into how technology is reshaping operations, unlocking efficiencies, and powering sustainable growth across sectors. In this conversation with Mint, we explore how global trends are influencing emerging markets like India, the accelerating pace of digital adoption in heavy industries, and ABB's role in helping businesses strike the right balance between performance, profitability, and planet-friendly practices. Joachim, welcome to Mint Tech Talks.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin by understanding what are the trends that you're observing in global process industries, and how are these trends playing out differently in EMs like India?
So the trends we're seeing in our industries, metals, pulp and paper, cement, mining, just to name a few, are growing needs for automation, digitization, which is then again driven by a strive for more sustainable operations, not just for environmental reasons, but simply also for reasons of producing more economically by basically using less input and producing more and also better output.
The world that we are in right now, there's a lot of volatility on the geopolitical front, on the global ecosystem. How does that impact sectors like metals, mining, cement, and the ones that you mentioned? Because they are capital intensive. Yes. So what's the impact that you're seeing over here?
The topic is a bit that the lead times for greenfield investment decisions are fairly long. And investors, of course, need to rely on a stable environment for this. And you don't have that in too many places right now. At the same time, we basically see that the demand, particularly for base materials, will definitely grow on the back of sustainability, for example. Think about the copper, which is required for windmills, all of the battery materials going into EV cars, and so on and so forth. For a supplier to those industries, it's not all negative, I have to say. Some countries are making investments simply out of motives of self-sufficiency, which maybe otherwise would not have happened if you would have like a perfect global economy. So I think the impact right now, I would think, is balanced. So with some shifts left and right, but I think the underlying demand is there. So the investments need to come and they will come.
You know, there are industries that are, of course, a bit more energy intensive, metals and mining for one, so on and so forth. Now, these are the ones that are under increasing pressure to modernize, just so that the environmental impact reduces a tad bit. So could you tell us, how are these industries coping with that? Are they adopting digitization to a certain extent to help them improve their efficiencies and also optimize their operations a bit more?
Yes. I mean, when we start at the basics, if you want to take it really far, often electrification is the silver bullet to decarbonization, which is, of course, assuming that you have access to green power. Otherwise, you're only shifting the problem. So this is a big trend, and for an electrical engineering company such as ABB, that's of course great news. The interesting question is then, industry by industry, how can you electrify their core processes? Often we're talking about heating to very high temperatures, so there's different ways of how you can do this. So there's a lot of things which are already technologically possible. The interesting question is whether they're economically viable, which sometimes also comes down to the absence or the presence of related regulation as well. So you see markets then also operating at different speeds depending on what regulation is in place. Then a bit more of a modest approach is to simply optimize what's already there for lesser resource consumption. And this is particularly where digitization can play a great role. Simply getting a better understanding of your optimal production conditions by gathering all of the data. And as our customers in metals call it, then really understand, how can I produce the golden coil every time I'm producing, rather than leaving it to chance or leaving it to particularly capable operators in the late shift, but then the next day you get different people coming in and you get different results. So I think the standardization to the top outcome is something where digitization can play a huge role.
To what extent is sustainability driving the adoption of digitalization, or is digitalization being used more from the point of view of streamlining your operations? And do you think sustainability is a key decision driver today for companies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, there's a huge fear of simply losing out to competition. Artificial intelligence is on everybody's mind, and it is said to have magic powers. And if you're not part of it, you're definitely having a risk of just falling behind, and probably because of the massive improvements it can bring, not just falling behind at some small margins, but significantly. So there's a huge interest in exploring this field, but it's still in the exploratory stage. Other technologies are more mature, particularly when it comes to analytical AI, machine learning kind of things. And I see that customers definitely want to produce typically higher grade products because they offer exponential, more attractive market conditions if you go for higher grade steel, for higher grade paper, and so on and so forth. When it comes to sustainable operations, digitalization is basically playing two roles. One, sometimes you're adding quite a bit of complexity to the process. So, for example, if you're using different sources of power, you're probably well advised to operate an energy management system which helps you to make these choices and to optimally use these different sources. And I could give you many more examples for such complexities. One which comes to mind is when you're substituting diesel-powered mining trucks with electrically powered mining trucks. So all of a sudden you have to think about charging those trucks. So that's a level of complexity. If you don't want to lose operational efficiency, you just need to get on top of that. Autonomy would be another such example. If you're striving for autonomous operations, you simply need to put more digitization in place and able to operate the equipment autonomously, typically from remote sites. So all of that comes into play. But digitization can also have a direct impact on more sustainable operations simply by understanding your operating conditions better, understanding your needs better. We have the customer here in India to cut his gas flarings by half by implementing a digital solution just to basically have a better understanding when this energy source was needed so that the rest would not have been gone through the pipe, basically.
You know, I love that. And I'd like to hear more about how ABB is playing a role in this entire transformation as a part of your global as well as, local innovation ecosystem.
I think the part we can play is that we have a very unique combination of deep domain know-how of our customer industries and also then great capabilities in creating industrial software. I would always say there's probably people who know more about the domain. There's probably people who are better at coding, but there's probably no one who can do both at the same level. And that is very valuable to our customers. When you look at India in particular, we have built up an innovation center in India, which now is about 4,000 people strong, so fairly sizable, the biggest of its kind, in fact, in the company, where we're basically tapping into this incredible potential here in India. You have to see that the industries we're discussing, steel, cement, India has some of the largest installed fleet. When people talk about India as an emerging country, for me, it's actually beyond that stage by far. I mean, steel companies are among the leading, not only local players, but also global players who have been pretty much taken over most of the European steel industry, for example. So I think we're far from an emerging economy in that sense. And if you look at India's role in grooming a lot of engineering talent, particularly software engineers, and at the same time operating some of the largest fleet of those heavy industries, again, you see a very attractive combination to set up camp exactly here in this country if you actually want to bring innovation to this industry.
There's no doubt that the market is competitive. It's also very cost sensitive. So tell us how you help companies balance that trifecta of performance or profitability, at the same time, efficiency in operations, and of course, being sustainable.
I think the point is that in the absence of regulation, you simply have to have a good understanding what makes immediate economic sense. A lot of the digital solutions provide paybacks for less than 12 months. So in those cases, it simply comes down to making sure that our customers have some budget set aside for this. Because in terms of the economic viability, I have very little concern about this. If you want to go deeper into the process, a lot of the solutions would require regulation to make them economically viable, such as CO2 emission charges of kinds, CO2 emission trading systems, which we basically see implemented in certain jurisdictions, but not necessarily across the board. Companies are then actually going hybrid without hesitation. So we see one and the same customer going down a different technology road in a regulated environment versus an unregulated environment. But it still helps them to gather very important insight. Indian customers in particular are curious about all new technologies, whether they bring sustainability or efficiency advantages. Often that anyhow goes hand in hand. So a lot of the pilot applications we actually had here in India, and sometimes it was probably not even primarily for economic gain, but it was simply to learn more about that technology and understand what additional potential might be there. And maybe simply also for the honor to be the pilot customer on a global scale.
Could you share a bit about those technological innovations that you're introducing, or something that's already ongoing or perhaps planned?
Yes, we are, for example, collaborating with startup companies which bring innovations to industrial heating. So the kind of temperatures you need for cement production, for steel production. We expect to basically see the pilot applications here in India for rotodynamic heating, where air is being compressed in such a way that the air is then heating up rapidly and massively, rather than using hydrocarbon type fuels for that same heating process. And we expect that to happen in the local cement industry. And again, I think the main driver is really the interest in that technology and to see it deployed and to help it thrive, because these pilot applications, of course, have incredible importance for a startup to just basically demonstrate the viability of their technology.
I'd like to hear from you what you believe is the future of process industries in, say, 5 to 10 years from now. And of course, how is ABB positioning itself to lead this transformation?
I think the future is definitely green. Energy will become more and more expensive, but it will also, there will be growing concerns over the environmental impact, depending on which energy mix you're using. That is certainly one thing which will happen. The other thing which will happen is it will be more centralized. We see a lot of decentralized operation, plant level, or even further down. This will be difficult also from a workforce perspective, in my view, because then you have either a lot of decentralized knowledge, or in certain geographies, not so much in India, you might struggle to find any operators at all, because younger people wouldn't necessarily consider this an attractive work environment. So there's centralization of controlling your operations, all the way to remote operations. If you think about mine sites in very unfavorable locations, high altitude, people living in container villages, to the extent you can cut down on the activities which are really required on site in favor of managing more of that site remotely from a nice downtown air-conditioned location, also helps you to attract a more diverse workforce, which is also a huge topic for our industries. Just tapping more into the pool of female workers, for example. Our industries traditionally are not overly attractive, but again, it depends a little bit on the kind of working environments you're creating. So that will be a trend. And then, as we already discussed, digitization will be a huge driver, because our industries, that's why they're called process industries, you're running fairly complex processes which are not always easy to predict. I mean, you have a rough understanding, of course, how you produce cement, how you produce steel, but hitting this optimum point is not so trivial. And digitization will really help you to hit that point every time and not just every once in a while. It will help you to reduce scrap in pulp and paper production. It will help to reduce paper sheet breaks. In steel production, it will help you to basically avoid specification production and so on and so forth. So, and that again, this is where you see that efficiency and sustainability anyhow often comes hand in hand.
Okay. Taking cue from what you said about India having this immense talent pool, especially of engineers, how important is it to have a local R&D or a talent development center in ABB's global strategy? I mean, is there plans to build India to be a center for innovation?
I think India is already our #1 center for innovation. Particularly in digitization, the largest execution team is already located here. I have to say that you always need to strike a good balance between local and global execution. Global execution means higher efficiencies, higher consistency. If you have a local team which implements certain projects only once every 5 years, you will not get the efficiency and not the quality levels customers expect. And I think that's good news for India. I mean, we currently have more global execution resources located in India than domestic execution resources, because these are two separate teams, which shows that India is both attractive as a domestic market, but it is also extremely attractive as a global execution center in our industries. And that goes all the way from traditional electrification, automation, to really high-tech, either products or digitization competencies. So we all have that here, and it is already by far the largest location of that size. What we need to have locally is, of course, a sufficient manpower to take care of the installed base to the extent that it requires really physical intervention. As I said before, also there we're working with customers to reduce this dependency. And if you were to set up remote operation centers, again, India is one of our preferred places to do so, because of the qualified workforce, because of pretty good IT infrastructure, because then, of course, you need to have data links with your customers and all of that. So I think that we're seeing a bit of a shift from very locally minded to more global execution. And India is definitely a winner of this strive for global execution.
We often talk about this convergence of IT and OT, or operational technology. Yes. I'd like to understand how ABB is navigating this intersection, because at the end of the day, you want to deliver integrated solutions to your customers.
Yes. The IT-OT integration is really very close to our heart. I mean, we had been fighting this divide for many years. And we're very pleased to see that we are now increasingly talking to the CIOs and the CDOs of our customers, positions which might not even have existed 5-10 years ago, particularly CDOs. In fact, we will have a conference in this very location here where we bring together some of the largest process industry customers with their CDO communities. And that already shows that now the people who used to take care of your information technology in the companies are increasingly getting involved into the operational equipment because of that convergence. There's basically two angles to this. One is that it is understood that the equipment is no longer purely mechanical, but it is basically fully digitized, which means that it is basically a computer with some adjacent machinery. And thus the interest from the information technology side to it. The other aspect to this is that it then needs to live up to the very strict requirements of operating IT equipment. Think about cybersecurity, think about user interfaces. And I think that also helps to accelerate some of the developments on the OT side, because all of a sudden you basically see pretty high standards from the IT field, which you have to live up to. And there's absolutely no second guessing how quickly you need to be there. You need to be on the spot and you need to be right there.
There's no doubt that decarbonization is a priority, is a focus for many of these industries. But the trick is to do and undergo that entire transformation without disrupting your core operations.
Yes.
So how is ABB helping companies and industries do that?
I think it comes down to having practical solutions. It comes down to having solutions which allow you incremental improvements rather than big bang improvements. The big bang improvements require a lot of capital, and they often also bring significant changes to the way you operate. Not all customers are necessarily ready for that. Some are, some are not. It depends on customer policy. It depends on the regulation I already mentioned. You always have innovators who are having it in their corporate DNA to do these things. Others will only follow once they see that, okay, competitors are having success with that. So what ABB does is really to say, we can offer you the full range of a complete transformation of your operations because technology is there and we can bring it to you, often through partnering with other players, because there's probably not a single company which could do it all. Or we basically agree with you on a step-by-step approach where we have a close eye on return on investment, if that is your main driver, while you basically also gradually then limit your environmental footprint. And I think that is important, that you can do both for your customers and not just impose on them a certain way of going on their sustainability journey.
Well, there's no doubt that change will come. It's a natural process and order of things, and Industry 4.0 is coming. But apart from process changes and operational changes, I'd like to know that from a leadership perspective, what do you think are the key qualities or mindsets that need to be embraced to cultivate Industry 4.0?
ABB is investing a lot in this thought leadership. Okay. And I'm personally convinced that you need to see always not just one goal, but basically all goals together. And then you often see how the stars are aligning very nicely. What you see is that sustainability is becoming a sales argument. If you're trying to sell into supply chain of companies which are committed to reduce their emissions, sooner or later as a supplier, and I'm thinking about a steel supplier to, let's say, the European car industry, will be asked about CO2-free steel. We do see investments in such operations. We see investments into CO2-free steel production, which is based on the commitments car manufacturers had put out there. We've seen similar investments into aluminum smelters for CO2-free aluminum because someone studied all of the sustainability and ESG reports of the Coca-Colas of this world and says, okay, where are all these cans supposed to come from? And I think that is, in my view, true thought leadership. These investors are certainly taking a risk. They're going new ways. But I think it takes those people. And what we see in the market is that this brings some fresh blood. It's often not even necessarily the established players who are the first movers, because they're sitting on a fleet of conventional technology. And for them, it's pretty painful to have that converted. If you're a startup and you start something fresh, you would naturally go for the latest and greatest in technology. Sometimes you see this also countries which haven't been pursuing certain industrial activities. Let's say you start building up a mining industry. We see this in Argentina and Saudi Arabia, where there wasn't much activity like that before. They then basically start on the right foot straight away. And they then show typically greater ambitions than the established players. And I think that can then serve a bit as a reference for the rest of the world.
Well, we've spoken a lot about digitization, and obviously it's the benefits that ensue, but of course it comes with a con as well. And you briefly alluded to that, and that's cybersecurity. So that is a growing concern, no doubt. But how are you ensuring that this threat remains abated? Or, how do you ensure data integrity and operational security across your solutions?
This is super important. If you don't get the trust of your customers that your solutions are sufficiently cyber secure, a lot of the solutions I just portrayed are not going to happen, because they all require a data connection. They all require certain activities to be performed in the cloud. And if there's no trust that you can operate that safely, it's not going to happen. So ABB has a two-pronged approach. Whatever we put out there as a product needs to live up to highest cyber security products. So already in the product development phase, and then of course in the product delivery, there are very stringent requirements which we follow in order to make sure that these products are as cyber secure as they could be. So that is more the internal focus on our own products. And then of course we have solutions helping the customers to keep their overall fleet cyber secure by basically detecting unwanted intrusions as well. So on the one hand, the customer gets products which live up to the most stringent conditions when it comes to cyber secure products. And on the other hand, they can then get solutions on top of that for their entire fleet to detect intrusions. I always tell customers that no one should think that, okay, I'm not critical infrastructure, because people think too much in terms of cyber terrorists. I think the majority of cyber attacks are simply people who are trying to extract money. And that can basically hit anyone. And it might even hit non-critical infrastructure much harder, because they are typically less prepared.
It's particularly exciting when companies like ABB collaborate and partner with different institutions to bring forward an integrated solution for a client. And I know you mentioned that as well, that you do partner and collaborate with startups. So could you share a bit about any such partnerships, not just with startups, but perhaps with the government or academic institutions that will help you accelerate innovation?
We are definitely in partnership mode. I think it takes a certain degree of humility to understand that some of these challenges are so big and the novelty factor is so large. You cannot possibly do this all on your own. And if you tried, you probably wouldn't bring the best solution. Sometimes there's competing solutions which are not overly mature. So you deliberately want to develop or you want to follow the development of more than just one of these solutions, rather than putting all of your eggs in the same basket there. So we are working with startups in all kinds of different fields, whether it's green hydrogen production at larger scale, using different technology there for the hydrogen cells. Whether it's heating is a huge topic. So I mentioned the rotodynamic heating, but we're also working on heating based on plasma torch technology, which is generally speaking a very versatile and fascinating technology. We're probably having dozens of university collaborations across the globe for various technologies, which often has the additional benefit of attracting young talent into the company at the same time. We are working very closely with government, typically more on the regulatory side, providing input of what regulation might lead to what kind of desired behavior in our industries, how you can monitor these kind of things, because regulation is always well intended, but isn't always very effective. Yeah. And governments are increasingly interested, in our opinion, to see, okay, how can we effectively basically nudge the industry to move into a certain direction? So we're having a lot of those interactions. I have to say that equally important are these vanguard customers who help us to put technology out in the field before it is completely ready. These field tests are of incredible value, and we do this with some of the largest customers in the mining industry, in the steel industry. Sometimes we do it with smaller ones who take a particular interest or have higher ambitions, who are more agile, but I can't necessarily say it's this group or that group. But I'm very grateful to those customers, because it also takes away a lot of their time And it's certainly a bit disruptive sometimes to their operations to do that, but it's incredibly helpful. Despite our domain know-how, we are not operating steel plants, cement plants, and mines. So having someone who's willing to put it out in the field is of huge value to us. And I think that this collaboration has taken up a lot of momentum in the past, let's say 5 years, I would say. If I only follow, we have a bit of a process around this. If I follow the number of cases which are now presented to me, I think they have easily doubled over this period of time, because there's so much going on, and we always have to think rather twice, what do we want to take on ourselves, or where would it be better to pull someone in who's deeper into this subject.
Mm-hmm. I think since the beginning of industrialization, there was always innovation and change, but the pace of this innovation has just sped up so much in the last couple of years that it's, a collaborative nature and a partnership always goes a long way. And I'm glad to see that ABB is, leading the charge over there. Joachim, this brings us to the end of the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was my great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
As industries navigate a future defined by complexity and transformation, it's clear that digitalization, sustainability, and operational agility are not just buzzwords, they're imperatives. Through this insightful conversation, Joachim Braun has shed light on how ABB is not only enabling global process industries to adapt to these changes, but is also playing a pivotal role in shaping India's industrial growth story through innovation, localization, and long-term value creation. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Mint Tech Talks. Until next time, stay tuned as we continue to bring you conversations with leaders who are reimagining the future of business and technology.